Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. Hope your morning is going well, or if you happen to be watching this in another time zone in this afternoon or maybe evening, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Hope your day is going well. Welcome to our session here at UCalgary on chemical engineering. Today's panel is entitled A Day in the Life of a Chemical Engineer. My name is Joe McFarland, and I'm the Media Relations and Communication Specialist here at the Schulich School of Engineering, and I am pleased to be your moderator for today's panel. We'll be introducing you to today's panel members in a moment. Now, if you have any questions throughout the course of today's presentation, you can post them in the Zoom webinar Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to those questions at the end of the seminar. I would like to take this opportunity first and foremost to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region here in southern Alberta. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. To give us a bit of a start to the morning and to introduce you to today's topic with the chemical engineering here at the University of Calgary, I'd like to introduce you to the associate professor in the Department of Chemical and Petroleum Engineering. He's also the associate head, graduate, and research focusing on natural gas hydrates, cryogenics, thermodynamics, and a number of other things. Matthew Clarke joins us now. Matthew, take it away.
Morning. So thank you very much, Joe. So as was mentioned, I'm in charge of the graduate program in the Department of Chemical and Petroleum Engineering. I'm an associate professor, and some of my research areas, as Joe mentioned, includes gas hydrates. I also do some work in biofuels as well as thermodynamics. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. On that note, Matthew, before we get started here, I just wanted to ask you just to kind of give us a little bit of a brief overview of the program here at UCalgary and what people can expect first and foremost.
Certainly. So the Chemical and Petroleum Engineering program starts at the undergraduate level, where we have basic chemical engineering as well as chemical engineering with specializations in numerous fields such as petroleum engineering, environmental engineering. And then going on to the graduate level, we've got the course-based Masters of Engineering, which also has specializations in the likes of petroleum engineering, chemical engineering, environmental engineering, and reservoir characterization. We've also got masters that are thesis-based, which are called the Masters of Science, and we've also got the PhD program. So we've got a complete range of levels of chemical engineering being studied in our university. A lot of the research is energy related, but it's not just energy related to hydrocarbons. We've got a lot of people doing alternative energy. Myself, as I mentioned, I do some work in biofuels. We've got many people doing biofuels. Other people are working on the likes of solar cells via electrochemical reactions, as well as batteries. So it's a very broad spectrum in terms of research, which also allows for a very broad offering in terms of courses for the graduate students that are in the course-based masters. All right, back to you, Joe. Oh. Okay. Okay, Joe, are you frozen there?
It looks like we've lost our moderator, okay, Joe, there. So just wanted to jump in and see if maybe we could get the other two participants. Meredith, Conrod, I'd like to introduce you, and also Etleva Shehu. So Shehu, sorry. So please join us, and thank you so much. And I see Joe's back, so we'll let him carry on.
There we go. My apologies on that. Gotta love technology first thing in the morning. Apparently it needs a cup of coffee as well. Thanks for pinch hitting for a second there, Nicole. Matthew, again, thank you for that. And I don't know where we're at. I think, have we introduced the panel members yet?
No, we're just moving on to introducing Meredith.
Fantastic. All right, let's get into that now. She graduated from Chemical and Petroleum Engineering in 2018. She's the Senior Business Development Representative at Keyera Corporation. She manages the business of large engineering projects such as natural gas processing plants, pipelines, or natural gas liquids infrastructure. Meredith Conrod is joining us this morning. Man, oh man. And this also joining us this morning, graduated from Oil and Gas Engineering in 2017 and is a process safety engineer in training at Cenovus Energy. Etleva Shehu joining us here as part of our program. So everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to start off with sort of I know this is going to sound kind of weird given that we're usually talking about the ins and outs of petroleum. But I kind of want to get into the personal lives and get into sort of how you got involved in this in the first place. And so, Meredith, why don't we start with you? When did you realize that you wanted to be involved with chemical engineering?
Well, I had a teacher in junior high who was a former engineer, and he came to me and said, "You really like math. You'd be really good at engineering." And just planting that seed kind of stuck with me throughout high school and when it came time to apply for university. So I remember putting a lot of research into the different types of engineering and the different disciplines available. And it really came down to the fact that chemical engineering is versatile enough to let you work in a lot of different industries. I was really interested in the world of energy, and it ended up being a really good choice for me.
Etleva, how about you?
So my story is a little different. So I always loved math, and that's why I kind of just decided last minute when I was in high school to get into engineering. But my path in ending up in petroleum was so unorthodox. I wouldn't recommend it, but I kind of just, it's something that I used to be so embarrassed about before, and I never shared with anyone. But I think it's important for people to hear that the path isn't always linear. My first year in Eng was just super difficult for me, and I ended up getting not the best grades. And my goal was always to get into chemical engineering. Definitely didn't get the grades for that. And then I ended up like basically taking a year where I kind of like I upgraded my grades, and then I finally ended up getting into petroleum, which initially, I mean, I felt like I wanted chemical, and then I ended up in petroleum. And then once I was in it, it was just the program for me. And it's just so crazy sometimes in life where you don't plan on things going that way. It's not the path I thought I would take. But I think looking back on it now, everybody I've talked to, all the side guys, I think it was just like a really humbling experience. And it really shows you if you really are passionate about something, you really shouldn't give up on it. It can be challenging at times. It's not an easy program, but professors like Matthew on the line, and like you'll have a really good support system. They'll help you get through it. But even though it's not linear, like you'll end up where you are and you're like, wow, I think this is the way it was supposed to happen. And I don't think I'd be the person I am today if I didn't kind of struggle through that. Because I don't know who's on the line, but I used to always be like top of my class in high school. And I think it's really important to realize that you're with the like the cream of the crop when you're in engineering. And that's just so motivating. There's people around you that like challenge you kind of to like level up and to push yourself and to challenge you in different ways. So didn't think I'd end up in petroleum, but I wouldn't change it for the world now.
Well, and it really goes to show, I think, at the end of the day, and especially given how much of a shaker COVID has been and kind of leading people down different paths, that's a great example of one of those situations where, you know what, you kind of, if you can go with the flow, it might pay dividends in the long run. Matthew, I'm interested how you ended up where you're at now.
Okay, so my story was a little bit different too. Initially, well, I always knew I wanted to go into engineering from high school, but initially I wanted to go into electrical engineering because I had aspirations to make guitar amplifiers. I still do a lot of tinkering with guitar amplifiers in the background, but what I found in my first and second year in our Common Core curriculum was I didn't like my electrical engineering classes. So I really couldn't see myself going into that at that point. And so I looked at what I was taking. I liked chemistry courses. I liked the fluid mechanics, thermodynamics. And then on top of that, my grandfather in Australia, he's a chemist. And one of his claims to fame was he invented a thickener in a food called Vegemite. So if you've ever had that, yeah, so I have, I guess, an ancestral connection, at least to that side, to that leaning of engineering. So that's what got me into the path of going to chemical engineering. Then from there, I found that I really liked it. I really liked the variety of topics and the breadth of topics which are covered in chemical engineering.
Let's expand on that question here and talk about today, but what inspires you as you go about your day to day on in this role now? And we'll start with Etleva this time.
Okay, so I think through the course of my career, it's really important to figure out what two things are you like really passionate about. And that's not like an interview style question, like what are you actually passionate about in your career? And for me, I think through the years, I've realized like I really am passionate about females and leadership and volunteerism. And I think what's great about working in chem and petroleum is there's endless opportunities to do that with any role that you're in. So with any company that I've worked for so far, they've always had opportunities to they've either there's a woman in energy that I think Meredith is on, that's like outside of, I guess, my career, but also like at my company, I'm on the committee for women in engineering. So just, it's so great that things that I think I'm passionate about that I would do regardless of engineering. I think the fact that my career can help me like elevate that to a different level, I think that's like the best part. And same with the volunteerism like aspect. That was something that was great at the University of Calgary. There's endless opportunities to get involved, especially the chemical and petroleum committee. This is kind of a plug, but there are so many great associations. I was on like the Petroleum Energy Society. This is a chemical, like CES, Chemical Engineering Student Society. I love that. Like I genuinely loved doing it when I was in school. And I think I learned so much applicable knowledge just volunteering and putting my time towards that, like before I graduated. But now that I'm working, there's endless opportunities to volunteer. So I think it's great that my degree kind of helped facilitate that.
I want to expand just on something you mentioned, and it kind of perked my interest a little bit. Is I think that there might be a sentiment out there that oil and gas or energy is a male-dominated field, and yet here we are with two females on the panel. Do you find the level of acceptance pretty good in the industry? Is it changing? Do you get the sense that there's a changing of the tide, maybe?
I think it's definitely changing, and what I like is they're promoting females in leadership in a way that it's like value based. It's not just like a metric where we have a target for females in leadership. It's very value based and making sure you have the proper resources and the proper mentors. For me, anything you do in life, if you're not surrounded by people that are doing it, it's hard to envision yourself in it. So sometimes all it takes is to have a committee where you are around female leaders. There was opportunities for me to work really closely with like the only female SVP at Husky when I was there. So I think it's like those small little changes that are inspiring females to go more into it. But I definitely think it's changing from when I started my career to now. I really feel like females are getting way more into engineering, and I think it's great to see. And when I was in Cam Petro, I think it was a pretty even split. I don't think I noticed the discrepancy. I know maybe some other disciplines there was, but I never noticed it in Cam Petro.
Meredith, I saw you nodding along as well. Wanted to get your sense, number one, on what inspires you on the day-to-day, but also what you're seeing when it comes to that female male demographic.
Well, what I'm seeing with the demographic is that it's completely a meritocracy. So it's you get to earn your position on any project or in any company. And just with so many women graduating from engineering, all disciplines, you're seeing a lot of really smart and talented women in the workforce. I personally am on a project team that's probably about 40% women, and it's really encouraging to see. It makes me really excited. As for what inspires me, so I'm in the business of infrastructure, right? We build energy infrastructure. I've built power plants, pipelines, gas plants. And I think it's really cool to be able to point at something and be like, I built that. That wouldn't be there if me and my team hadn't worked on that for a couple of years. So with engineering, you get some really tangible outputs, whereas some jobs, like you're really just doing spreadsheets, like if you're in finance or some other type of stream, whereas engineering, you actually get to see things built and you get to see tangible progress, which I love.
Matthew, you have a bit of a different lens. I want to talk a little bit about what inspires you, but also want to get your sense as to what you're seeing in the classroom now when we talk about that demographic split and some of the things that kind of are changing right in front of our eyes.
Okay, well, I always joke that with working from home, what I see in the classroom is just a bunch of blank screens with people's names on them. But regarding the demographic shift, chemical engineering has always been a pretty even split. It's been the one department which typically stands out. There's other departments, as I think it was Etleva had mentioned, which have 5% women in their contingencies. Now, at the graduate level, it's not quite as even of a split. I would say it's probably about 1/3 female students at the graduate level, but at the undergraduate level, it's definitely a much more even split is what we see. Amongst the faculty members, I would say it's probably about 30% female faculty members now is well what we're seeing. Now, you were also asking me about what inspires me. So regarding that in chemical engineering, I think what inspires me is just the variety of topics that I can investigate. I have a lot of freedom to pick and choose which directions I want to take. So as you mentioned, I do some work related to gas processing. in natural gas, but also recently I've started doing some work regarding data analysis, so rather than working in the lab and getting my hands dirty, now I'm just downloading data, analyzing it, and then going in a completely non-traditional chemical engineering background. And the other thing with the chemical engineering program too is it is evolving. If you look at chemical engineering programs basically around the world, a lot of them were set up at the time in the 1950s and 60s at a time when refineries were being built, whereas now it's much more common that the chemical engineer's knowledge base has to go into running and optimizing these plants. So the programs are continuously evolving to reflect the changing roles of chemical engineers.
Matthew, how rewarding is it when you see some of your students succeeding in the real world? You have two students here, or
I was
former
just going to
students.
say, I have two students right in front of me.
It's got to be something else from your standpoint to be able to watch them grow and succeed at levels that maybe you didn't even see possible.
Oh, definitely. And I can give you an example of where I didn't see something coming. Just a few days ago, I was scrolling through LinkedIn, and I bumped into a graduate student. It actually is a female graduate student who did a master's with me 7 years ago. And she's now president of a company that does environmental engineering. So yeah, it's a source of pride to see that I contributed to that, and that, I helped the students get to where they were.
Etleva, I know you mentioned Matthew in one of your previous answers, and wanted to talk a little bit about the special relationships that are created in school and then outside school, and the importance in your eyes of being able to foster those relationships and not burn any bridges along the line because of how, I'll call it, small the industry might be.
So I think the best part about working in Chem and Petro was, so in my career, I've worked for Cenovus, ConocoPhillips, Husky, and now Husky is Cenovus again. But in all the roles, I transitioned from summer student to internship to new graduate. Every time I did any of those roles, there was always a cohort that did it with me. And I think that was just the best part of my entire career so far. It's so great to have that support system when you're trying out a new role, because sometimes when you're starting a new role, you're maybe apprehensive about asking certain questions. Every role I've done, there's been a cohort of students my age in the same program as me. And it's been so great to have that and to ask those questions that maybe you wouldn't be comfortable asking. And the neatest part about that is people that I've met that I worked with at Cenovus or ConocoPhillips, they all now work at different companies. So now I have contacts. I never knew that at the time. They were just like my friends that I did a summer field job with, but now they work at companies all across Calgary. And that is a crazy support system to have, just, across the scope. But for like, that's the neatest part, I think. But for me personally, I really love working with site guys. I think it is so underrated, and it is the best part about, like, it's really hard sometimes when you're in engineering and there's like these weird stigmas with engineers and site guys. But I think if you really take the time to develop those connections, my job is infinitely easier, and I respect them so much. Like, they know sometimes way more than I ever could. And just having that and like fostering that, I think, has been invaluable for my job. And just, it's so great when you go to site and you get to hang out with them too. It's just such a different dynamic. I was going to mention that later too, but you do a lot of site rotations, which I wasn't as familiar with when I was picking my discipline or in university. I didn't know that it entailed that. So I think I learned that having those connections is just really valuable. And like I mentioned earlier too, maintaining them. When I met the female SVP at Husky, just keeping that connection and keeping in contact was great. Because
Meredith, I wanted to expand on that a little bit, just in terms of that relationship building. And that, is that something that maybe is underestimated when you're going through post-sec, and then all of a sudden you get into the real world and you go, oh, I guess I should have made friends here, there, and everywhere?
Yeah, right. Like there's a finite pool of chemical engineers graduating every year. There are a lot of roles to fill at different companies. Etleva's probably lived through this the most, because with merger and acquisition activity, like, you could have a friend who works at Cenovus and then wake up one day and realize Cenovus has bought your company, right? And now all of a sudden they're your coworker. And so the people you meet going through these programs end up being in your career forever.
Wanted to expand on the idea of surprises a little bit here, Meredith, and we'll start with you on this one. Is what's taken you by surprise as you've gone along your journey?
I think I'm surprised at how versatile the degree has been for me. Like, people go into engineering and expect I'm going to be designing pumps for probably 10 years, or I'm going to be designing gas plants or injection wells or something like that. But I've been surprised at how many opportunities and how many doors have been opened because of this degree. I get to work in a business development role now, which is great because I spend a lot of the day talking to people and really sanctioning investments as opposed to doing some very specific technical work, which has just been great for me and my personality. And so if you had told me that when I graduated from my undergrad, I probably wouldn't have believed you.
Etleva, you seem to be nodding along a little bit as well. I get the sense that maybe that's a part of your answer to what surprises you the most so far.
Oh, I was definitely going to piggyback that. What's great about like this career is any path you want to take, someone will fully support you. For example, I had a friend right now, because we just graduated in our like new graduate program. He wanted to be a trader, and he realized after the fact, and the company supported him. He is like an engineer at the company as a trader. And that is not your orthodox path. I realized, kind of like Meredith, I like the people aspect. And sometimes I would have imposter syndrome where I don't feel like I'm technically smart enough like other people that I work with. And I think I've learned that that's okay. You don't have to push yourself into this mold that maybe you don't fit into. It's okay that I like the people side. There's so many opportunities to expand on that I never knew before. And I didn't know that, right? And there's people that end up in some of these roles. I don't know if like maybe with you, Meredith, like their backgrounds aren't even engineering per se. So it's great that with like chemical and petroleum, you can end up somewhere and not necessarily even, have that background, but you can end up in it. So
Matthew, do those answers surprise you, I guess, becomes the question.
Not at all. And
No?
and my answer is going to piggyback on those two answers as well regarding the variety. So like Etleva and Meredith are showing, there's a lot of variety in the jobs that chemical engineers can get into. I've seen people go into business section. I've seen people go into government and all kinds of section. Even myself, I moonlighted for 5 years as an instructor in an MBA program teaching energy policy. And so there's a lot of breadth for where you can apply your chemical engineering skills. And I think that's one of the most important things that potential incoming students have to be mindful of, is rather than just don't get stuck in the mindset that you're going to be designing refineries, to be more wide open to what are the possibilities of applying with your degree.
Does it surprise you when they say that it was the human interaction side that maybe they underestimated as they were going through school?
If I was maybe 10 years ago, it would have surprised me. But I mean, now that I'm in the director position, I'm also finding the same thing too, with the importance of the human interactions and the importance of people skills.
If you have questions for our panelists, I want to do a quick reminder here is that you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the webinar here and just type in the question. We'll get to those at the end of today's session. Moving on to some of the questions that I have as we go through this process. And again, kind of going back to that personal life thing. And Matthew, we'll start with you on this one. What's your typical day like?
My typical day, I get up at 4 a.m., work out, walk the dogs, play music, and then I do some other things. And then I get started, usually work around about 7 o'clock. And then if I'm working on campus, then I'll run home in the afternoon, walk the dogs again and play more music again. And then somewhere in there, I'll usually have to answer emails and do some work. So I like the flexibility that I get in my particular job. I mean, being a faculty member, outside of meetings and outside of teaching, I do have a reasonable amount of flexibility in terms of when I do my work. So that's one of the things that I really like. Yeah. So my day's probably kind of strange for most people.
Meredith, how about you? What's your day like as you go to the office?
My day does not start at 4 a.m., Matt.
No.
You're giving chemical engineers a bad reputation. We're not all intense. My day is spent really most of the day talking to people. I spend a large portion of my day working with energy companies, oil and gas companies, try to figure out what problems are they trying to solve, what's preventing them from increasing their bottom line, how can we step in and do something with our infrastructure and our business model to help them do their job better. So if I'm not talking to customers or clients upstream, I'm then back working with my project team, large groups of engineers, and saying, how can we get this infrastructure built? How can we build a business case behind it? And really, how do we tie all this together? So it's a lot of different things. There's some project management, there's some engineering, there's some spreadsheet modeling, and some panel talking like this.
It kind of sounds to me like one of the aspects of the job that you're really enjoying is the fact that no 2 days ever seem to be the same.
For sure. Yeah. You have to be nimble and you have to adapt to whatever's needed that week.
Etleva, how about you? What's your day at the office like?
Well, I work from home right now. I don't get up at 4 a.m. Hopefully one day I'm trying to become more of a morning person. It's funny how it evolves. I've never been a morning person. I love stocks now, so I'll get up early. Stock market starts at like 7:30, and that gets me like going for the day. It's like the really good adrenaline boost, and then I'll kind of start my work day at 8. What's cool when I was thinking about this, every single role has been so different. When I was in plant engineering, it was 12-hour days in the middle of nowhere, an hour away from Lloydminster at a plant, sitting actually at the plant. When I was in BD, it was so fast paced. It felt like the movie Suits. Sometimes it'd be like, you need a slide deck for the CEO ASAP. And I was like, oh my God. And then, and you do it and you're so impressed that you could do it. But right now I'm in process safety, which is so neat because I feel like out of all the rotations I've done, I'm applying chemical and petroleum more than ever, which is awesome. So I'll be applying, like, the operators will give me like gas rates, temperatures, pressures. So it's really neat to finally apply the chemical and petroleum stuff that I learned more directly than I have in the past. But out of all the roles, I guess because it's safety, this is a way better pace. It feels like there's no rushing with safety. It feels like it's more intentional. It's more thoughtful. There's a lot more I'm thinking of the word. I was just thinking about like symbiosis, like one of those plug words. But out of all my roles, this one is just so different, and that's what's so great. I think going forward in my career, every role is gonna like evolve. So.
Mm-hmm. I want to expand on, we talked a little bit about inspiration, and you mentioned the fact that you get up in the morning and you're looking at the stocks and that gets you fired up. But it's one of those questions that I actually face during job interview processes is what gets you fired up in the morning? What makes you excited to get to the office? So what is it that gets you going for that, 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever the job might entail?
So for myself first?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just love working with people. So anytime I look forward to meetings that I have with people, collaborating with people, presenting. With this role, when I was able to go to site, like when COVID wasn't this bad, I was able to coach people at site. That's what really gets me motivated. And if there's anything I would ever tell people is to just communicate that. I've said that to every boss that I've worked with, and anytime maybe a role doesn't have that, they'll go out of their way to find that whatever role you're in. And maybe if there's opportunities to switch roles so that you can do that more often, that's always what's motivated me the most. And I've always would recommend to people that you communicate that so people know that and they can incorporate it into your workday.
Meredith, how about you? What gets you fired up in the morning and gets you raring to go to the office?
I think what gets me up in the morning is the idea that I get to learn something new every day, right? You always get to learn more about maybe how your gas plant works or how operations is going to get lined out that day. Maybe what your customers are doing, right? There's always a lot to learn, and it makes me excited to go to work.
Matthew, what in God's green earth makes you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning?
Well, I get myself up. No, in fact, I don't even use an alarm clock to get up. But no, it's just, for me, it's a habit, but I like what I do. So I don't really need to sleep in.
It's one of those situations where if you love what you do, you never have to work, a day in your life is the old saying, right?
Yeah.
Now we've talked about the good stuff. What about the bad stuff, Matthew? What kinds of things are maybe the toughest parts of the job?
Okay, so in my particular director role, I'm involved with distributing resources, be it money or be it people, and saying no to my colleagues in various contexts is probably the biggest challenge in my job. I mean, these are in a lot of cases people who are more senior than me, and I have to tell them, no, sorry, you're not getting money this time, or you're not getting everything you asked for. So for me, that's got to be the toughest challenge in my job. And yeah, it's something just have to be prepared to face. That anytime I'm distributing something, there's always going to be someone who's not happy. So part of it is I come to the conclusion I'm not going to try to please everyone when I'm making decisions.
Mm-hmm. Meredith, how about you? What is maybe the toughest part of your job?
I think industry ups and downs can kind of weigh on you if you're not careful. There's been a couple questions about it, and everyone knows it. Like the upstream sector has been hit hard this last year, and while things are looking really good right now, people are still living in a really disciplined environment. And so not knowing how to navigate these channels, not knowing what the world's going to look like in 6 months, can be really tough. I'd say there's some uncertainty there, and engineers don't like uncertainty. We're very much black and white people. So if you could just tell me what oil is going to be in 60 or for the next 6 months, or if you could just tell me what power prices are doing, or how many wind farms do I have to build, like that would be great. But we don't get any of that certainty, and that makes it tough.
Etleva, how about you?
I think for me, it's just adjusting to things that maybe are outside your realm of comfort. I mentioned that I previously did a field role. I had to meet my boss every day at 6 a.m. He was kind of like a Matt. I think he got up at 4. I had to meet him every day at 6 a.m. and I had to drive with him for almost an hour and a half in the truck to the work site, work a 12-hour day, and then drive back with him. So I was in the car with my boss for 3 hours every single day. And that didn't even count as work time. So just adjusting to different roles, different work environments. I was put into such like roles that maybe I thought I wasn't capable of doing. And I think it's great because that's where you grow the most, right? You realize that there's resources there. You can push yourself to do anything that maybe you didn't thought was like capable for before. And I kind of piggyback what Meredith said. It's a rough time in the economy right now, but I think like Sergio, I'm up with the stocks. There's ebbs and flows, and I think oil and gas, like it's okay to not dwell on kind of like the dips. I think oil and gas is still prevalent, so I think pushing through it and realizing that it's going to rebound. It is rebounding. I told you I look at the stocks like companies are rebounding, so that it's all okay.
Is that something that maybe I'll call it understated? Is I know a lot of when you talk about the industry as a whole, I think that there's that perception that most companies are able to pivot. From your standpoint at Etleva, and I want to get Meredith and Matthew's take on this as well, is that must be an important aspect of what you do on a day-to-day, is being able to pivot along with what the company is wanting as well.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like companies are taking it super seriously. I've always felt like Canada is super ethical, and I've loved the way that they've always produced in the past. But for Synovus and even for Husky, they take their ESG really seriously. I think it's something that I'm really proud of to work in the industry, and I feel like they're working towards like migrating to cleaner energy, and I think that's great, and that's the way I would do it myself. I feel like you can't just drastically pivot right now. We still rely on oil and gas a lot, and I think it's inspiring that we're just slowly becoming cleaner and that we're working towards that goal. So I definitely see it at work.
Meredith, you talked about it a little bit in your previous answer there, and maybe expand on this notion that, it's oil and gas or nothing. It's not really when you think about what the companies are up to. You mentioned the fact that you're having to plan wind farms and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, no, the energy companies are going to play a really big role in the energy transition, and having a background in chemical and even petroleum engineering is going to play a big role in that. Like you think about geothermal, that's reservoir engineering, that's drilling, and you think about natural gas production, that's really important for hydrogen, especially in this province. Think about pipelines, you're going to have to transport hydrogen. All of these companies are shifting their attitude towards how can I be still involved in oil and gas, but how can I contribute to the energy transition? And it's really great to be involved in both.
Matthew, you're the one at the front line having to teach a lot of these youngsters about being able to transition and pivot and that kind of thing, while also teaching them the essentials and that kind of thing. So what are you seeing? What are you saying on those front lines?
So one of the things I'm seeing is a change in the research that's being done at the university. So people that have been traditionally doing reservoir engineering, production engineering, now they're getting into the likes of tailings water cleanup or flow assurance, for example. So It's there's still certainly no shortage of interest in those basic fundamentals about getting oil out of the ground, but now it's going up there. I guess you could say the picture of what people are interested in is expanding. And then along that lines, in terms of coursework, we see more demands for what we've traditionally called soft skills. So we're looking at now incorporating more in the likes of entrepreneurship and courses like sustainability into the curriculum. And so there's a heavy demand for those sort of courses as well.
As I mentioned, you're on the front lines. What are you telling them about job prospects and what the industry brings as a whole right now?
Well, for job prospects, I mean, it's kind of similar to what Etleva and Meredith have been saying. There's certainly jobs for people out there who are well connected. I think one of the most important things that people have to be mindful of, particularly if they're international students, is to build a strong network when they come to Canada, is take the time to go to networking events and to meet people. I had, for example, one MSc student. He came to Canada for the very first time from Venezuela, didn't know anyone. He did his master's in 18 months, and within 3 months, he had a job. And the whole reason that happened is because he made the effort to go out and to meet people and to network. So it's super important for people coming into, whether it's MSc, MEng, BSc, that's one of the most important things for people right now, especially in this climate.
Meredith, what would you say to those who are entering or thinking about entering the MEng and thinking about the opportunities that might be abound?
The MEng is really cool because it's a wide open course path. If you're doing this course-based master's, you get to pick really 10 courses to take that teach you enough to shape your future, right? So if you're really interested in reservoirs or geothermal or drilling, you can take a lot of those courses. If you're really interested in the renewables path, you can take, I know there's an alternative energy course. You can take project management. You can kind of just shape your future through that MEng program, which is why I took it. I really enjoyed it.
Etleva, how about you?
I mentioned earlier how my degree started off kind of rocky, but by the time I graduated, I think what was neat for kind of my path is I ended up getting a job offer in Texas as well. So I had to decide if I was going to do the rotational program in Calgary or if I was going to go work in Texas. And through my professors, they were like really helpful in helping me decide between that. So I never thought I'd have opportunities like that ever before. And I don't think that's changed. I helped do interviews for when I was at Husky, now Snovis. They're still hiring. I think that there's lots of opportunities, like we said, outside of oil and gas. So I still think there's lots of prospects. And like we mentioned, it's so versatile, chemical engineering. So I don't think that there's any changes right now. It's just, like we said before, just adapting to the times and just finding things that work with the current environment. That's all.
Now, usually we don't get to the Q&A session until about 10 minutes, 15 minutes left in the panel discussion. However, as I look across there's a lot of them. So it's great to see that everybody's perky and ready to rock and roll. So we're going to start off the Q&A a little bit earlier than normal and get right into it. And thank you to our panelists who have answered some via the keyboard, but I want to be able to verbalize them as well. And so we'll start off with this one that I know, Matthew, you answered via the keyboard as well. Is there a course-based specialization in carbon capture and storage or in natural gas processing?
So in chemical engineering in the MEng program, we have courses which cover gas processing, which cover carbon capture and storage. We don't per se have a specialization in those, but students certainly will get exposure to those topics. They'll also get exposure or the opportunity to interact with faculty members who have contacts in those particular industries.
Now, Adnan asks the next question. He says, I'm a recent graduate in petroleum engineering with a BE degree. I would like to hear your opinion about how an MEng in chemical and petroleum engineering, specialized in chemical engineering, can open up various opportunities in the energy industry. A lot to weigh in on there. Meredith, why don't we start with you on that one?
Sure, we've touched on this a bit, but if you go ahead and do your MEng, you just get that much more time specializing in new things. So You can take natural gas processing principles and technology if you want to get into that stream, or you can take, I'm trying to think of some of the other cool courses I took, like naturally fractured reservoirs. Like there's just a lot more detail you can get into with this MEng program. And that helps when you're networking. You're talking to people and you're saying, hey, I really like carbon capture and storage. I've taken these reservoir classes. I understand how enhanced oil recovery works. Like let's chat, right? And so I think the MEng program just gives you a lot more time to specialize in the things you find interesting.
Matthew, you'd like to weigh in on this one as well?
Sure. Sorry, what was the question, Joe?
I'm a recent graduate in petroleum engineering with a BE degree. I'd like to hear your opinion about how an MEng in chemical and petroleum engineering specialized in chemical engineering can open up various opportunities in the energy industry.
So at the MEng course-based level, you have a lot of freedom to tailor the courses that you take. So depending on what your aspirations are for which direction you want to take your career, you have that opportunity. So again, if you want to, for example, have the possibility of going into public policy, maybe you want to take a course in that specific area. Or if you're interested in looking at data mining, then you have options and courses like that. So you have a lot of flexibility to customize your program.
Etleva,
Hey, Joe, can I add one more thing to that?
absolutely.
So I find this funny, but the last course I took in my MEng degree, because Adnan and I did chemical engineering too, I wrote a paper for Dr. Clarke on cannabis production. So if you're wondering about different opportunities, there's a whole world you can explore there through ChemEng, because there's a lot of cool engineering problems to solve when it comes to manufacturing cannabis.
Yeah, like water and energy minimization, there's waste treatment and being a new industry. So there are opportunities there.
Etleva, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think they did it perfectly. No.
Perfect. We will move on to the next question in the Q&A. And again, if you have some questions for our panelists, by all means, type them in the Q&A and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. The next one comes from Usama. I'm a prospective graduate student for the MEng Petroleum Specialization at U of C. Wanted to ask about the prospects for petroleum engineers to transit towards the geothermal energy sector. I'm particularly inclined towards reservoir engineering and want to know if there are opportunities for reservoir engineers in renewable industry. Meredith's nodding, so I'll let her take a stab at this one.
Yeah, I mean, you can take petroleum engineering, you can take courses on reservoirs, and then you can go talk to some of these geothermal companies. I mean, it's always a good idea, like reach out to them now and ask them what they look for in graduates, ask them what skills they hire for. And then take a look at the program and find the courses that will get you there. There's absolutely opportunities.
Etleva?
Yeah, I would just add to that, a lot of the courses that were part of my petroleum degree are so applicable and I think would be directly correlated to that. Like I did well testing, well logging, drilling. Like I feel like I was the most set up for like geothermal reservoir production. So I definitely think that, and you don't have to do the petroleum degree itself. You can do that as a minor. You can do that in addition to your degree. There's so many opportunities. If you're just interested in the course, you can just always just add it to your curriculum. But I found it like they're really applicable. That's the reason why I loved my petroleum degree. I thought like everything that I learned in the course was directly applicable at work. And it felt like I got that advantage that other people sometimes didn't have. I took, we have unconventional oil and gas too. And that course was the most applicable for our industry. I feel like anytime I'd go into any meeting, they really like set me up for success in that sense.
Matthew, anything you'd like to add?
Well, a lot of the fundamentals around drilling and around predicting flow in porous media is directly applicable from petroleum engineering over into geothermal engineering. Additionally, there's a lot of commonality in the policy aspects too. Last I checked, Alberta actually doesn't even have a separate policy for geothermal. That might have changed in the last few years, but I know BC does, and it's very similar to what they have for drilling policies as well.
Next question. Any thoughts on what kind of challenges are faced by the upstream sector in the current times, particularly in North America? Matthew, you took a stab at this on the text line. So what would you like to say in verbalized?
I see one of the biggest uncertainties would be related to the regulatory climate right now. So I mean, whether or not you build or expand something is going to depend on the laws in place. It's going to depend on various treaties and regulations for pollution, et cetera, et cetera. So regulatory uncertainty, I think, is more of a hurdle right now than technological uncertainty. I think in a lot of cases, at least for existing technologies, the science is understood. So now it's getting things working, getting them working to spec that meets certain regulations.
Meredith, would you like to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, we do have world-class reservoirs here. We have the technology to extract those. It is a question on what's the carbon tax going to do. We're linked a bit to the US as well. I mean, what are we going to do? What are they going to do with respect to fracking bans, right? Canada is kind of going to balance off of that. And if they decide to ban fracking, we're going to have some certain opportunities that we didn't have before. But whether Canada follows suit in that regulation, like, you don't know. So the upstream industry has a tough job in trying to keep up with policy and with governments. But like I said, we're already seeing a lot of adaptation take place. People are starting to adapt to the carbon tax, trying to get ahead of it, and looking for more opportunities to make money that way. So it's nothing we haven't overcome before.
Etleva, anything you'd like to add?
Basically, just what Meredith said. We are really contingent on the states. So, for example, when I worked at Husky and I was in BD, that was a lot of our midstream, which was working with pipelines. You can hear in the news like Keystone XL was canceled, but I think companies are just adapting, getting creative. When I was at Husky, they have their integrated corridor. So we have refineries that we own in the States, and then we just ship on the pipelines to there. So companies are definitely finding ways to just overcome these hurdles. So
There was an answer that Meredith gave earlier, and I want her to take the first stab of this next question. Do you have any advice on finding jobs in the current economic climate? From my experience, there are few jobs and many candidates, and it's hard to make myself stand out.
It's so true. It's hard to stand out when you're just like, you've submitted a resume online and you can't see anything back, right? You don't get any feedback from all these applications. We've all been there. Like, I know Etleva and I are both employed, but we've all been in the world of applying for jobs. And it's tough. But what I would say is expand your definition of these jobs, right? Like, don't just search chemical engineering new grad, right? Like, start to look in different industries. Don't just look in upstream. There's a lot of work to be done in a lot of different industries. And we talked about this at the very beginning of the panel, but chemical engineering gives you so much credibility. Like Etleva's friend who wanted to go become a trader. People see that you have a chemical engineering degree and they trust that you're smart enough to figure any job out. So if you're having a hard time and you've tapped into your network, I would say expand the type of roles you're looking at. Maybe there's clean tech, maybe there's new industries that you haven't thought of that could really use your talents.
Etleva?
So I asked kind of my hiring manager, because I was curious. I was like, because I agree, it's really hard to make yourself stick out. But they got back to me with just illustrating things that you do outside of your degree. And I never looked at it like this, but everyone applying is going to have a degree. And you are stressed about your GPA, but GPA is not forever. It does help you for acceptance, and it does help you to get your first job. But after that, no one really cares about your GPA. But I think what was great was they told me highlighting other things that I did that were extracurricular. And if you don't have the time commitment to be like on a committee, you can just volunteer at an event. There's, especially with COVID right now, a lot of people are offering free webinars, right? And free conferences. If you're passionate about carbon capture or geothermal, like find like a conference or find like a talk on it. There's SPE talks, there's APEGA talks, there's CHOA, there's endless opportunities. And especially with COVID, they're offering it for free now. So if you really care about it, find a way to do it. And then that's something you can highlight in your cover letter and your resume. And that's another thing, just making sure your cover letter is unique and you've put a lot of effort into it. I know people hate doing that because it takes a lot of time, but it's worth it if you want the job, right? So I think just like highlighting all these things in your cover letter, from what I've heard from all the hiring managers, was the reason why I was able to stick out, is because I highlighted all these other things that I did. And on that note too, that's how I met Meredith. It was it was like what is it?
Young professionals in energy.
That's how I met Meredith.
Yeah, they host networking events. To expand on what you said, because not everyone knows these acronyms, SPE is the Society of Petroleum Engineers. They put on a lot of educational events. You can check those out. CHOA is CHOA, Canadian Heavy Oil Association. They also do a lot of this stuff. Like these are the kind of groups you can go find if you're looking to network.
Matthew, as someone who's dealing with the student side of it, what are you telling students to get them to stand out?
Well, I always tell the students that if they have an engineering degree, then when they go to apply, that the employers will pretty much assume that they have the technical competency to start in the job. And so it's really going to be the non-technical competencies which will set them apart. So things like communication abilities and things like leadership experience, for example, are the kind of things that will make someone stand out. And as Etleva was saying, customizing your cover letter is something you want to do rather than just giving a generic cover letter. I mean, even in my field, I probably get a dozen generic cover letters a day, and they're all from the best student in the best university of the world, no matter which student is sending them to me. So make sure, you can stand out and make sure that you've come across like you've put effort into reading about the job, that you know what you're getting into.
From the panelists, I want to expand on this a little bit. How much of it nowadays is based off the networking opportunities versus, hey, I've got great grades? And I'll use the example of, as previously as a manager, I used to hire based off the mentality that I can teach talent, I can't teach attitude. And so I'd rather have somebody with 100% attitude and 80% talent than somebody with 100% talent and 80% attitude.
Yeah, it really comes down to some of these soft skills. Like, can you sit in a meeting and drive progress and talk to people and communicate? Those things are really important because, like Matt said, everyone has the technical skills. We all graduate from the same program. It's about some of those softer skills, which you can get through networking and some of these extracurriculars that Etleva was talking about.
Etleva?
Because I told you I do the interview process for companies I work for. I think getting that initial job, the GPA helps. I wouldn't necessarily say it's networking per se, but it's your experience that speaks volumes going forward. And I always recommend to people, if you are able to get a summer student job or an internship job, you've already worked for the company. If a manager or someone can vouch for you, then that's everything. So I don't know if that's technically networking, but if you're internal and you've kind of proved yourself, then I think that's the best way to kind of progress with a company.
Mm-hmm. Matthew, anything you'd like to add on that point?
Well, from my perspective, when I hire people, I get a lot of overseas resumes. And so if I'm looking for someone, it's going to be a 2-year or 4-year commitment on my part. So it's kind of a risk for me to hire someone that I've never met. So if I can have a resume coming from someone I know with a note saying that I already can vouch that this person is good, it certainly makes my hiring a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to continue with some of the questions on the Q&A. Again, if you have any, feel free to drop us a line, text, or we've got another 5 minutes ish or so before we wrap things up. From Festus here, and this is probably more aimed at Matthew here. I'm a fresh graduate of industrial chemistry with a CGPA of 4.04 out of 5. What are my chances of gaining admission into this program?
Well, I would have to look at your transcripts to see exactly what your courses were that you took. So it would depend on what your course background is. It will depend upon where you came from. I mean, if CGPA of 4 out of 5, I'm going to guess maybe that's a Columbian university, that being on a 5-point scale. So again, it will depend on the university it comes from. So the best thing will be to send your transcripts to meng@ucalgary.ca, and then we can look at them. So I'd have to answer that on a one-on-one basis.
Lots of great questions about GPA and that as well. And so we'll kind of leave that to academic advisors and that kind of thing to weigh in on some of that. And I know Nicole behind the scenes has been answering some of the questions there as well. Wanted to touch base a little bit on what you're excited for heading into the future. And we'll start with Etleva here. What's exciting you as you look ahead to the next 6 months, the next year, the next 5 years, as you go about with your day-to-day job?
Oh, I'm so excited to just keep progressing towards, I told you, like the people aspect for me. I love that I don't feel like I have to necessarily stay in oil and gas, even though like I am right now, and I want to progress with that. I think it's so great that like the future is endless. Like we said, maybe it'll be more renewable resources. Maybe it'll stick with oil and gas. I just love knowing that there's so many prospects, and I feel like I'm the most set up for success. I don't feel nervous at all. I feel like with my degree and with like every role that I've had so far, I feel like the world is my oyster. Going forward, I know people here want to do their MEng. For me personally, I want to pursue my MBA. My company is supportive of that. There's so many people that I went to school with. A lot of the girls that I really like looked up to at university, they did their MBAs in Europe. There's so many opportunities. And I think that's what's so exciting, is not knowing what's coming and that there's so many options out there.
Meredith, what's got you excited for the future?
Hey, I hear UC is a really good MBA too, but we won't plug that. You don't have to go to Europe. What I'm excited about, well, like directly related to my job, I am on a project that's going to come in service in 2023. So I am working on a 2-year timeline right now, and I'm just really excited to see all the moving parts come together on that. Usually you think about work and you're kind of working like 3 months at a time, but we have a lot of moving parts. And to think that in 2.5 years, everything could be built and we could have an operational project is very exciting.
Matthew, how about you? What's exciting in your world?
Well, the most exciting thing for me right now is getting back into the classroom. We don't have a firm date on that yet, but that's the thing I'm most looking forward to right now. Regarding the research, is just taking on new projects and seeing them come to life. I mean, like Etleva and Meredith said, you start a project and then 2 years later you get to see it, and there's a certain rewarding feeling about that.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask one final question before I'm mindful of the time here, and I'll start with Etleva on this one because she kind of alluded to something there about the MBA and the idea of entrepreneurship. I know Matthew talked about that. I know Meredith's talked about it as well. I know that personal brand comes into it because we talked a little bit about the hiring side, and I think some people think entrepreneur, personal brand, it's one and the same thing. But talk a little bit about what's exciting you about the opportunity to maybe move into the business side as well as not just the engineering side.
Oh, I think it's really important. And for me too, with my degree, you're able to take business courses. So in part of my petroleum degree, I took some business courses. I thought that was great. But like I said, opportunities are endless. Some of the people that I went to school with created their own oil and gas company. And they did, like 3 guys that I did petroleum engineering with now have their own company. The opportunities for entrepreneurship are endless. And I think, especially now, I don't know if like you guys agree, Meredith, but I think if you have an idea, you can totally go with it. I think now more than ever, it's totally easy to create a business if you want to. So yeah, I think entrepreneurship is great. And we talk about the business sense. I think it's really important for people to understand the business side. And I think, because I don't know if I was as aware when I was in industry, but just understanding things on a macro scale and how oil and gas and the energy sector is affected relative to tech or industrials or commodities. I think that is so important. And no one ever told me that before. And I'm even learning this now, which is what, like 3 years after I graduated. I just never knew how things on a macro scale were so important, and that you need to know that even if you do work towards renewables, you have to understand how that is impacted by other industries and how that's impacted with things like COVID and reopening. Like it's all what's so cool to me is it's all moving parts and they're all related. And I think that's just fascinating and something that everyone should like make sure that they know on top of everything that they do with like their MEng.
A lot of nodding coming from Meredith's office right now. You seem to be in agreement there.
Yeah, there's a course in MEng that I took called Petroleum Economics. And even though it was the least technical course I took, it was probably the most exciting because we had a guy who worked for Shell. He was like an advisor for Shell, and he also taught at U of C, and he came in and taught us about how like energy is priced, like why we have such volatile swings. One day he brought in an investment banker to do a guest lecture, and it was really cool. So just getting to take courses like that help you understand how the business of energy works, or the business of geothermal, or the business of pharmaceuticals, whatever it is you're taking. And that just helps you have influence in your career.
Matthew, does it excite you when you see the level of excitement that is not just here in the panel, but when you see recent grads or those students who are sitting there going, or people in the industry who are genuinely excited about the opportunities, especially when it comes to being able to do, you have an idea and you can build off of it?
Yeah, certainly it is exciting. I mean, for me, again, it's it's a little bit of personal pride having contributed to their knowledge base. But then also when I bump into people like Etleva and Meredith, I can also learn from them now that they've gone through these processes.
Fantastic stuff. Well, I am mindful of the time. It is 9 o'clock Mountain Time here. So would like to take the time to thank Matthew, Meredith, and Etleva for joining us as part of the panel for today's MEng discussion. Thank you to all of you for joining us here this morning as well. And if you have any other questions you'd like answered, you can email us meng@ucalgary.ca. Again, thank you all so much and have yourselves a wonderful rest of your day.